Let's pick up on this story now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has arrived in Nigeria to attend the inauguration of President-Elect Bola Tinubu today. The 71-year-old was declared winner of the February 25 presidential elections. This was after he defeated 17 other candidates, replacing Muhammadu Buhari. His victory is, however, being challenged in the election tribunal by the opposition parties who claim there was vote rigging. Well, let's stay with this story because South Africa and Nigeria account for approximately a third of Africa's economic output, with each accounting for 60% to 70% of the economies in the regions. Well, let's speak now to Dianna Games. She is CEO of the South Africa-Nigeria Business Chamber to dissect some of the trade relations between the two nations. Dianna, good morning to you. Let's begin with the legacy of the soon-to-be predecessor of Mr. Bola Tinubu, that's Muhammadu Buhari. How would you rate him in terms of economic performance of that country, Nigeria?
Good morning. In terms of economic performance, you know, he has had some track record as the former governor of Lagos State. So, and that is despite its small size, is the commercial center and probably biggest generator of GDP of all the different 36 states in Nigeria. So, and he did what by most accounts a fairly good job in Lagos State. So he does have some track record in terms of performance in the business and commercial arena. And I think you arguably that is a really important thing for him coming in as president into a country that is suffering quite considerable financial and revenue generation, forex, and a range of other economic problems, because he has people are already describing it as probably the world's toughest job right now, is becoming the new president of Nigeria, given what's in the in-tray. So I think it's just as well that he does have that experience. He is an old hand in the political arena as well. He's not coming in as a sort of freshman. He does know how the political terrain works, and that's very important in Nigeria. It's something that I think you have to understand to navigate it properly, and it is tough. And I think the main concerns really are that he came in with such a narrow mandate, probably the lowest mandate of any president since the end of military rule in the late 1990s.
Sure.
And that, you know, whether that disrupts his attempt to push through much needed reforms or not is still to be seen. Obviously, the different tiers of government are very powerful in Nigeria as a federal state. So I think everybody will be watching quite carefully what he does and what he puts in place for the economy, because that is where the real problem is right now, and in a nation divided after quite a divisive election.
Let's talk about the U.S., which is a major trading partner on the African continent. South Africa is the second largest beneficiary of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, in short, AGOA, and it is second to Nigeria, which means President Buhari has maintained that stranglehold, if you could put it like that. What is it that he has done right, and what might his successor need to do to maintain that?
Well, on the AGOA front, I think a lot of the trade, it's not diversified. If you look at the trade basket, even with South Africa from Nigeria, it is 9.5 crude oil. And so even though the trade balance is very much in Nigeria's favor, it is highly undiversified. And I think you'll probably find the same pattern is happening with AGOA, although I think with America becoming an oil producer, I think at some point it stopped even buying Nigerian oil. But so I think that, you know, as I said, I think the biggest thing that is that President Buhari was not he was an old-fashioned leader coming from a different time. He wasn't an economically minded or business-minded person. He was also a former military ruler. And I think what he did a lot of stuff that people would say was highly damaging to the economy. And one of those things was a huge raising debt, and with the best intentions, as often is the case, and that is to build much needed infrastructure. But what happened is not enough has happened with that money, and Nigeria has this huge debt bill, paying, I think in every 100 naira, something like 90 naira goes to debt servicing. So that is a huge problem in terms of revenue. So I think that one of the first things he would need to do is, how do we fix the oil industry? That is a key thing, because it is the main generator of Nigeria's revenues, and particularly its foreign currency. There's been a lot of problems in the Niger Delta with vandalism, with all sorts of issues, and oil production is right off the highs that it should be to sustain the economy. So that's a real issue. And the forex crisis, as I mentioned, that is linked to that. But it's not the only generator of forex. I think what the new president needs to find ways to save money, and one of those is to end the oil subsidy, the petrol subsidy. It's a complicated formula, but essentially it is hugely expensive and costly to the fiscus. So those are the key areas: is forex, debt, and revenue mobilization. But he also, I think, has to prove that he can be a kind of a unity candidate in a country that's now more politically fractured maybe than it has been for a long time.
Yeah.
And he has to deal with the sort of legacy, the Buhari legacy, which most people would argue is not a positive one. Yes, President Buhari had to deal with the oil price fluctuations, particularly seriously over the COVID era. And also COVID lockdowns and all of this sort of thing. But nevertheless, there's a lot of policies people say that were wrong, but he wasn't one to really listen to the populace or to advisors. He had some very good economic advisors too, but nevertheless, that didn't seem to have changed the trajectory.
Talking about political fracture, let's perhaps use that as a theme, because South Africa and its trade ties with the United States, some are holding the view that this trade between South Africa and the U.S., it hangs in the balance because of the latest claims by the U.S. ambassador to South Africa that we may have sold arms to Russia in its war with Ukraine. The reason I'm raising this is that there is a clear competition between South Africa and Nigeria as to who is the biggest economy. Should South Africa start being squeezed by the United States, where might that put Nigeria?
Well, I think that the policy direction is quite different. I mean, Nigeria is a big has very strong trading links with China, India. I'm not sure what the profile is with Russia, but it's not a strong supporter of Russia in the way that we see South Africa being. And I think it certainly that's been shown in the voting patterns at the UN and various other places over the last couple of years in the wake of the Ukraine war. So I think it's a very different kind of dynamic there. People are saying that Nigeria is keen to be part of the BRICS. I haven't really seen that. I've asked people about it. I'm not really feeling it, but I think if it was on the table, Nigeria would certainly look at it. But it is the U.S. is a very strong sort of ally and partner of Nigeria and has been for a long time. So, and you find there's quite strong ties between Nigerian nationals. A lot of people have jobs there, are educated, send their children to school there, etc. So there are quite strong ties in the way that we don't necessarily have so much in South Africa. I think what we're working on as the Chamber, we're working with government, and this is something that I think everyone is looking at, is under the African Free Trade Area, not just trade but also investment and other forms of engagement, is how to build more between African countries. Now here we have the two biggest economies in Africa. I'm not sure they're vying for, I think it's clear that Nigeria in GDP terms is bigger. South Africa is sort of bigger in the sense of manufacturing and diversified economy. But we're looking at how to what are the problems between the countries? How can we resolve those to create more trade and investment between these two countries. And we're working in this project with the DT, the Department of Trade and Industry, and with the private sector. And there's a similar initiative on the Nigerian side. So this is a new thing that was launched last year, and the Chamber is very much at the forefront of that. So we're looking to say, let's stop always looking outside the continent, who's friends with who, who's doing what, etc. Let's rather look internally and see how we can build that relationship to make it stronger and to perhaps draw in other countries at the same time.
Yeah.
So, as I say, it's not a sort of a binary Africa and the world thing. I think I think the continent is moving much more towards looking inwards, and it's going to be a slow process. I think we can't expect miracles on any level, because it's been many years of sort of negative growth or negative development and so on. So, but anyway, so that is something we're working on, and I think that is a new way that Africa is and certainly should be looking at these kind of alliances. Even though, of course, we understand that the international community is extremely important, and we are still extremely vulnerable to developments in that community.
Yeah, and you speak about the African Free Trade Area. That was certainly the theme last week as the continent observed Africa Day. Let's conclude the conversation with a rather strange question. Maybe you might say it as strange, but are people, or should we say, do people and political observers alike, do they see age as a factor at all as to the progress of a nation? And I'm asking this on the back of Buhari, who has had health challenges. A 71-year-old is now going to succeed him. Recent press reports suggested that he was fending off bad press, which suggested that he was in Europe for medical reasons, whereas his response was that he's simply holidaying there. Can that be a factor, the age of a head of state and the economic prosperity of a country?
Well, I don't think that prosperity is necessarily tied to age, but I think what you find is perhaps the needs of modernizing Africa are not in the sort of the experience of a much older leader. And I talked about Buhari coming from, the military background, and also, basically a different world when he was formerly the head of state. And I think newer leaders would have much more of a handle on what needs to be done on opening up economies in a different way in terms of the whole digital process, etc. The age of the incoming president in Nigeria is a huge issue a huge issue there, because they have had these problems before. Not only did you have President Buhari endlessly back and forth on trips, on medical trips, however they were characterized. They also had a head of state who basically died in office, and President Yaradua. So, and what that does is it allows, there's sort of unseen players who become very strong in the background, as if you have a frail leader who's not physically able to always stand up to the job. So then there's a lack of transparency, perhaps, in who's actually holding the levers of power in that government. A lot of people have excused the frailty of the incoming president on the basis that he has a strong team around him. But at the end of the day, he is the president. He is the symbolically the face of the government, and I think it's important that the person who's elected is able to play that role. And it is a physical thing, but as I said, it's also a case of being in touch with the sort of what people want in African economies, where most people are below the age of 30, or at least half of the people. So yes, I think it is an issue, and we saw it in Zimbabwe with President Mugabe and now President Mnangagwa. Neither of them have excelled in any kind of way in terms of the rescuing the economy or governance. And there's plenty of other examples around Africa. Not to say that it's the young presidents who have excelled. I think it's often a personality issue. So it's not a one-size kind of fits-all kind of debate, but I would say it's definitely something that voters should consider.
Dianna Games, let me thank you very much for your insights.